Therapists of Reddit, what was your "you must be kidding me" moment? Intake clinician here. What brings you in today? I'm here for porn addiction. At this point, not the weirdest thing I've heard. Let's go with that. Okay, tell me about it. I watch it 3 times a week, for 15 minutes or so at a time. My girlfriend said I'm an addict and forced me to come in. I see lots of very extreme cases, but this was so minor that it made me stop for a moment. I sent them to couples counseling. My hyper-conservative parents sent me to an addiction therapist because they found out I smoked pot occasionally in high school. The therapist they chose was a former White House drug czar, a renowned authority on cocaine addiction and hard drug abuse, and an expert on rehabilitating extreme problem cases. My parents must have spent a fortune and pulled strings to get me an appointment. The first session he asks me what drugs I use. I told him I smoke pot like once a week and that was it. After a few rounds of "come on, you can trust me, and we can't begin treatment until you admit your problem," he realizes that I really do only smoke pot once in a while and literally says, "You have got to be kidding me. Tell your parents you are a normal teenager and you don't need to come back." One client of mine bites and eats his fingernails. Gross, but not unheard of. Then I'll learn he stores his fingernails in a box in his room to save them for a snack later. A little grosser, but he's about 9, so I'm hoping he will grow out of it. What finally made me want to vomit was learning that when anyone in his family clips their nails, fingers, or toes, they give him the clippings to add to his box. So when he's eating nails from the box, they could belong to his mother, father, or siblings. Yes, I've addressed the parents about enabling this behavior, but it is still happening. One that sticks out in my mind was a mother that brought in her 5-year-old for therapy because she was into Disney princesses, which are clearly sexual, and since a 5-year-old is non-sexual, this must clearly mean she's being sexually abused by a close family member. I've also worked with countless couples who have come to counseling for adultery wherein adultery equals porn. One client even became suicidal because she caught her husband jerking off after not having sex with him for months. I know everyone has different values, but come on, y'all. A client was going to probate court and thought he'd dress up by putting a non-slip sock on his collar as a tie. Trying to be supportive, I told him, "Nice tie." To which he replied, "It's not a tie, it's a sock, stupid." I used to work with children that have autism and Down syndrome, which means a lot of play therapy. I had my moment when one of my clients wanted to sit on my lap while we practiced reciting animal cards followed with their corresponding noise. Forgot what animal noise I made that made him laugh so much that he ended up peeing on me from the laughter. That night was also date night. Just today I conducted a threat assessment on a first grader who told his teacher he wanted to stab himself with a knife and die. Upon further questioning, he revealed that he and dad watched The Walking Dead together, and last time on the show he saw 2 people stab themselves to death because they didn't want to get eaten by the zombies. Why are you even watching that show with a 6-year-old? I was working surveillance one night at a psych ward, keeping a close watch on a mentally ill patient. Right before my shift started, I was briefed that the patient had started eating one of the light bulbs and attacked a nurse. At around 5 AM he woke up and saw me eating there at the end of his bed. I said good morning and he didn't reply. About 15 minutes of silence went by before he stood up and stared out the window and said a person is most vulnerable while taking a shit. I didn't sit back down for the rest of my shift. Social work, not therapy but close enough. Me, we need to think of some new ways for you to discipline your daughters other than spanking. Client, but my parents did it to me and I turned out okay. Me, stares at this high school dropout drug addict who has spent his entire adult life in and out of jail/halfway houses, can't get a job, and had his 3 kids removed for abuse and neglect. Okay, I actually did successfully turn this around in a gentle way and make him realize he hadn't actually turned out okay. Not a therapist yet, but I'm currently taking a counseling and therapies university course, and we occasionally hear some stories from our professors in lectures or tutorials. One sticks out in my mind because I'd never seen an entire class shocked into silent horror before. A guest lecturer told us about a client he had who used a craft knife to cut open his own scrotum and took out what was inside because he wanted to look at it and play with it. I had a client, an older female refugee, that I worked with for several months before she told me that she had court the next week and was worried because she could be deported if found guilty. She didn't tell me earlier because she was ashamed and suffered in silence. She was living with extended family and the family got busted for smuggling and selling cat, a stimulant narcotic. The family determined that she would take the fall for her husband and sons who were behind the operation. At the arrest, the police brought an interpreter for a different language, from a different ethnic group, in a different country than the client was from. On top of that, she said the police didn't have an interpreter present during the questioning at the station and she waited there for almost 2 days until they found an interpreter for her language. I asked her if she understood what was happening and she said her lawyer, public defendant she met once, told her she would be deported. Beyond that, she had no understanding of the situation, process, etc. I had seen her psych eval stating that she had the cognitive equivalent of a 7-year-old. So I told her that we have information that could help her case and that her lawyer should see it as soon as possible. This was on a Friday, court was on Wednesday and the client didn't know the name or any information about her public defender. We got a friend to help her collect the information. The client brought it to me on Monday, signed the Roy. Lawyer called me back that afternoon saying they've got nothing to help this poor woman, even though the case seems completely set up. I told the lawyer that we've got a whole bunch of insight and data and records that will get the charges dropped. I didn't work Tuesdays and was going nuts worrying and hoping everything would get to where it needs to and in the hands of the people who need to see it. On Wednesday news from court comes that all charges were dropped. I used to get all kinds of sprung on me at the last minute, then have to perform all kinds of bureaucratic trapeze maneuvers to alter the outcome of high stakes situations. I wrote so many letters. I was hired to be a mental health provider, but I ended up doing tons of case management because nobody else wanted to. Have a master's in clinical psychology and currently working towards my doctorate. I laughed reading this question because I feel like I have at least one of those moments per day at my clinic rotations, regardless of type of setting. One that stood out the most was when I was working a camp for children with various psychological disorders, most with some sort of behavioral concerns. The girl I was paired with had a history of aggressive and violent tendencies. We went the whole day without any problems. That was until we were doing some group physical activity to wind down and focus before leaving for the day. She didn't like that this meant no longer playing with a certain toy, so she took off her shoe and threw it at the little boy in front of her. He had autism and immediately started crying and screaming. While someone helped him, I turned to the girl to explain to her what she did was wrong. As I turned towards her, she punched me square in the face, then grabbed a hold of my hair, managed to pull out a good chunk. I'm about 5'1" and this girl was maybe 1 or 2 inches shorter than me and had about 20 pounds on me, despite being 9 years old. Trying to get a safe physical restraint was difficult and comical to say the least. Finally got some help from other staff and we were able to calm her down after about 15 minutes. The kicker was when we told her mom what happened, she basically dismissed the entire thing and laughed about it. So frustrating because you just know this kind of thing is reinforced at home as there is no punishment. The girl then starts hitting her mom, who grabs and holds down her arms. The little girl laughs, looks at me and the other staff member and says, "Ugh, a little help over here. Are you going to let her do this to me? She's hurting my arm." I went home and did this weird laugh/cry for a few hours. Luckily you learn pretty quickly not to take things personally and move on. So things were back to normal the next day. I do occasionally look back at that day just baffled at how quickly that whole situation escalated. Most of the other moments that come to mind involve poop in some capacity. I work in a community residence for adults with mental illness. Most of them are very capable and independent. One girl, 27 years old, constantly acts really dumb for sympathy and will do dumb things because she can, I guess. First week she was admitted she tripped on something getting out of bed. She's 5'1" and like 200 pounds, and she fell on her foot and broke some of the small bones in the foot. I take her to get her cast and she gets the usual "don't get the cast wet, use your crutches, elevate, Blah blah. Since her bedroom was on the second floor, we had to send her back to her mother's house for a few weeks, since she would not be able to exit the building in time in case of emergency. Well, 5 days later, the shoe/boot thingy to put over your cast comes in, and we call her up saying we'll bring it over. Her response, well, I don't think it'll fit. Why not? We ask. Because I cut my cast off, I got it wet, and it was too tight. They didn't give her a second cast and she used her crutches, claiming they were unstable and she would fall and get hurt if she used them. Her foot never healed properly, and 2 months later she fell and broke it again.